I'd like to demonstrate a technique called concept mapping, which you can use to organize and memorize ideas. The way your brain works is in order to remember things and sort of make sense of them, it has to put them into a structure. It has to connect them to one another. Otherwise, you're trying to memorize a whole set of disconnected ideas. And one of the things that students often find most difficult about science courses is that it's tough to put things in order, to figure out sort of among the details what really matters and what doesn't. So here's one way that you could do this for the material that you've just learned about matter. Okay, we said the basic building blocks of matter were atoms. So that's where we're going to start. Atoms come in a bunch of different flavors. That was one of the first things you learned. So one way we could diagram that is like this. So atoms come in flavors called elements. What else do we know about atoms that we might want to remember? What are the major concepts we want to keep track of? Well, one of the things we know that's really important is they don't change flavors. You can't change one kind of element into another, at least not without some kind of nuclear event. And for our purposes, that's not really important, particularly not in nature. See, what else? Well, if you put an electrical charge on an atom, that was something we talked about. It's called an ion. And ions have some behaviors that we could map out here. If you've got a minus and a plus, they attract one another. If you've got plus plus or minus, they repel each other. Okay, what else do we know about atoms? Oh, I forgot one thing that's very important. They're never created or destroyed. Again, at least not in nature. Hopefully not. So we're connecting all these ideas, these concepts that we know to be true about atoms, and we're connecting them all to this central concept. What else do we know? Well, we know we can join them into teams. And notice, by the way, that there are different ways of mapping these concepts that are totally valid. As long as it's helping you, that's the point. So we could say join into, leave teams off there, and make a circle up here called teams. Instead, I'm just going to do it like this. I'm going to jump straight to molecules. And one thing that's important is they don't behave like the component atoms. Let's make sure that we've got this on screen here. There we go. So atoms, so for example, elements like oxygen and hydrogen are both really flammable gases. You put them together and you get water. That behaves really differently. Another thing that's true about molecules is you can rearrange the atoms in them. Okay, you can take the atoms out of one molecule and recombine them into a different molecule. But one other thing that we know is true about those is that you have to account for all the atoms. The atoms never go away. They just change the molecule in which they're found. And this rearrangement can be easy or hard. What else do we know? Well, We know that there are some atoms that are very important, or some elements rather, that are very important in living things. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are the most common, but some elements that we're going to hear more about later on are going to be nitrogen and phosphorus, the elements that are really common on Earth. You've got nitrogen in the air. You've got carbon and oxygen in the air. Oxygen's also in water. You could be writing those details down here, where they're found, if you wanted to do that. And then there's silicon in the Earth's crust. As you go on through this course, you could then end up connecting all of these things to more pieces of information. So, for example, hydrocarbons or carbohydrates are these two elements here, plus sometimes this one. We'll talk later about the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle. You could connect those up there, and so on. Ultimately, you end up having everything in a structure that is much, much easier to remember, partly because it's visual, but also you're building these connections on paper that you want your brain to build between concepts.